to go to the second panel. Get ready. We are about to get a lot more intelligent. It's about artificial intelligence. The topic is about artificial failure, protecting AI from adversaries. From an editorial standpoint, we see two aspects to it. One is AI is becoming so important that data security, data corruptions, and biases are now becoming an issue for companies. People are talking about explainability of AI. And the US elections is also telling us how important it is in various formats. There is also AI in security, which is helping us to do more intelligent virtual policing and the use of adversarial AI to actually combat or look at other issues that might be, that we may have missed. I'm not the star, I'm just going to be the moderator of this discussion. We have an esteemed 4 panelists for this. Let's start with the ladies. We have Julianne Delacruz, Head of Data Science Solutions 1, Office of the Chief Data and AI Officer at the UnionBank of the Philippines. Hi, Julianne.
Hi, good afternoon. Hey, good afternoon. Yes. Hi.
It is afternoon, don't worry. It's still morning down here, but it is afternoon there. UnionBank of the Philippines has been blazing a trail in terms of using new technologies and AI to reinvent banking. So it'll be interesting to see from her perspective how things are being done at her place. We have next Dr. Jianshu Weng, Head of SecureAI Lab at AI Singapore. Hi, Jianshu.
Hello. Yes, you can just call me JS. Yeah, I know sometimes Chinese names are a bit difficult to pronounce.
Yes, my honey pinyin is not that good.
Right.
AI Singapore is government-wide partnerships involving NRF, SMART, EDB, IMDBA, SGI, SG Innovate, and Integrated Health Information Systems. And if you want to know what those acronyms means, what Singapore really loves, we will need to have a separate discussion. We have next Michael Eksteen, a Vice President of Digital at APAC at Chubb Digital. Hi, Michael. Nice
Hi,
cap.
everyone. Yeah, I'm in lockdown currently, so you know, it's just easier with a cap.
Ah, that's quite cool. Michael and I, he has been our panelist for several times, and he has been helping set Chubb in setting new trends in terms of digital. Chubb recently launched work from home insurance, which I think is an interesting approach in terms of acknowledging the rise of the gig economy and what we really need. So, and lastly, we have Varun Verma, APAC Head of Data and Analytics at the HEINEKEN Company. He has told us that there should not be any more beer jokes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I mean, you can make any jokes you want on beer. I don't mind it, but as long as it doesn't hit my brands.
That's good. Heineken has been going through a lot of changes, as every beverage company as an F&B has been going through, especially during COVID, where distribution channels have been challenged. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Heineken is also looking at direct-to-end consumer efforts as well. And I'm sure right. AI and data will play a big part.
Yes, that's right. I mean, we are trying to digitize a lot of our processes, and then we are also trying to actually extend our value chain directly to consumers so that we can have more personalized and contextual relationship with them. And not only we help them actually providing these distribution centers, but also directly able to serve them as a company.
That's great. Thanks, Varun. So welcome all. We have two aspects of AI security, as I mentioned. We have the threat to AI, and you have also AI being used for security. Let's look at the first part, which is threats to AI, various forms of it. A lot of companies are now using AI for all sorts of reasons because they need to do a lot more with the current workforce. So maybe I'd like to start with Mike. Security risk, what are they assuming as a result of AI? What are they not, what they may be overlooking?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of you know, supposed risks in this space. You know, I think to be clear, you know, to kick this off in a positive note is AI is good. I mean, it's already in place in a whole bunch of different solutions and functions in the workplace. If you look at email and predictive search and all those things, it's starting to trickle into sort of in my industry into the underwriting world, which is great, and has got a massive benefit for the end user and the customer. But of course, there's a whole bunch of risks associated with it. I think more with the implementation of AI, and I think more sort of shifting away from AI as technology, the data infrastructure that is of course the engine on which AI needs to be implemented. And I think a lot of the conversation is based around AI as a risk. I don't necessarily see that. We'll talk about the sort of Elon Musk view at a later stage. Advanced AI and all that thing that could be a problem if in the wrong hands. But if you look at sort of AI for business, AI as a technology should be implemented in all business spheres across the sort of full end-to-end capability within an organization. But I think more so the risk lies more in the data infra, the data architecture, legacy systems, that opens up a whole bunch of gaps currently, and of course that's where the risk of hacking and security threat comes in, and I think that's more the risk. So if I could sort of sum it up from my side. Currently, if you look at where AI is, which is still pretty narrow in its life cycle, AI should be looked at and should be implemented across the board. But before that is done, the data infrastructure and the legacy back-end environment, there needs to be a decision on that, and there needs to be a very clear idea on what you want to do there and how that infrastructure and that architecture looks like before the AI implementation comes in. Currently, they're trying to force AI into a world that's completely incompatible with what AI needs to be able to perform really, and that's the area where the gaps is coming in, and that's the threat and the risk.
That's good.
Yeah.
Probably Elon Musk must have read too much of Isaac Asimov because he had this combative view. Dr. JS, your views?
Yeah. So yeah, thanks Winston, and thanks Michael. Right. I mean, certainly I would agree with Michael. Right. I mean, because AI at the end of the day is all really about data. Right. Certainly we need to get the data architecture and data infrastructure ready. Right. Because let's do anything. I mean, no matter what you're going to do, I mean, no one said the first thing you need to get it right? And then maybe I would just try to build on top of that, right? I think why we feel like there's a so-called security risk associated with AI, right? I think probably compared to traditional or kind of IT system, right? So what really make a difference over here? Because if you look at traditional, I mean, let's say the things which you discussed in the previous panel, I think what we really look at that is, I mean, from the traditional point of view, this security is really around as long as I can protect my system from the outsider. So typically we're trying to draw a line between our system and attackers, right? So basically in a way we're trying to secure our parameter, right? But I think what really make AI in a way a bit difficult to secure or a bit difficult to defend is really because the data, because the key ingredient of AI is really about the data, the training data, right? And the training data come from the outside world, and it can be easily be manipulated. I mean, I heard about bias and data poisoning and things like that, right? So those things is not like something which traditional kind of IT security system can really be able to protect, right? I think this is probably one thing I want to add on. And on top of that, I think AI is really a kind of, if you look from a kind of a machine learning something that we call it ML ops kind of a view, right? It's really from how you really take in data and how you really build a model and then deploy it into the system and then do the monitoring and things like that. So along the whole end-to-end kind of process, a lot of things can really go wrong, right? So the first is that, as I mentioned earlier on, biasness and also data poisoning on the data side. And on the modeling side as well, right? I think one thing which probably I want to highlight is a lot of times, I think now in the deep learning era, a lot of people talk about transfer learning, right? You just get the pre-trained model and then try to just do some fine tuning on top of that, which is fine, right? But in a way, it's good because it's also push the advancement of AI, right? But on the other hand, I'm really sure about the model which we are trying to transfer from, right? Is the model itself is really secure enough, right? We probably sometimes don't really know, right? I don't care. I just take the model as it is and just go ahead and run it, right? And then in terms of monitoring, are we really monitoring the performance of the model? Because we all know, again, AI is really based on data, right? And sometimes data will shift. Maybe when you build a model, the data is in this shape, in this distribution, and maybe a few months after you deploy the model, the distribution start to shift. And are we able to pick up the kind of a signal that the model performance is dropping? And if the model performance is dropping, how are we going to do about it, right? So all that kind of things is something that we need to think of, right? I mean, as Michael mentioned, maybe AI is still in the, whatever you call it, maybe still an infancy stage. But I think even from an infancy stage, we need to be aware of those kind of things, right? And then, yeah, I think that's probably my 3 cents. Yeah.
Well, just a quick one, Jess.
Yep.
When we talk about AI, there's different types of AI. There is the
Sure.
weak, strong, there's the narrow, and the wide. Well, in terms of a lot of implementations tend to be very narrow and weak AI,
Right.
while when we talk about deep learning, that's a totally different concept altogether.
Right.
What you just mentioned, does it apply differently?
So to me, it's all about the same. No matter what, I mean, of course, there's some kind of a discussion around, let's say, weak AI or strong AI, or even like AGI. I mean, of course, AGI is probably too far-reaching, right? Because a bit difficult. At the moment, I think AI is probably, in a way, is really trained to be more successful or more better in performing certain tasks, right? So they're probably more near term, right? But if you look at that, I mean, no matter whether you apply deep learning or non-deep learning type model, I think the same principle is still the same, right? Because it really depends on the training data, the quality of training that in a way will decide the performance of your model, right? And then that, as I mentioned earlier on, is probably the tricky part, because that is a way, it's a bit like a loophole into your system, right? Because if somehow your data has already been manipulated before you even train the model, then it can be a bit difficult to really like secure your system, right? So I think that I would say probably it really apply across the board, no matter whether it's deep learning or non-deep learning, no matter how simple it is, right? As long as you depends on certain kind of a training data to train a model, right? I think that probably that kind of a security or that kind of risk will still be there. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Julianne, from your perspective, how do you see AI security, especially with, I know UnionBank is experimenting with lots of analytics and AI, so I'm just wondering, how do you look at it?
Yeah, so, well, in terms of, well, we do have a lot of applications in AI, and I think it applies to all companies. So aside from the potential benefits that comes along with this AI-based systems, we should be aware of the risks. So just adding on to the very comprehensive stuff that Mike and JS has mentioned. Yeah, so it's really data. And what opens up AI to that risk is that we should be cognizant that AI models are not static. So to be able to have that AI model more accurate, there needs to be a it has to be routinely retained and updated so that it will be more accurate. And this constant model training frequently leaves that vulnerability to manipulation. So in our side, in terms of model training, there has to be that governance in place. So there's this thing, model risk management, so that the proper practices in terms of model building are in place. The rigorous validation and performance checking are there. So, and also additionally, where applicable, the AI application should have should incorporate some form of human supervision, just to be sure that before we actually deploy these models, if there are erroneous outputs that are in effect from the inputs that are, let's say, poisoned, it doesn't automatically roll out on a big scale. Yeah, so yeah.
Okay, that's a good one. Good points. And Varun, I see you're standing with a green of Heineken t-shirt. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, especially in an F&B company, how do you see AI security? And all the other speakers, panelists were talking about data security and creating a data layer and making sure that the data sets are at least relevant, current, and secure. How are you doing that within Heineken?
Yeah, so I mean, within Heineken, this topic has been now evolving. I think it is very recently now being discussed. Reason being, I mean, as we are approaching to consumers and then start collecting their information about, creating, I think, right context and then right, situations to actually promote our beer brands and then, occasions for celebrations. We need to be also mindful and cognizant of the fact that we do it with the right, with appropriate measures and then responsibility. The thing is with Heineken is it's slightly different. I mean, because predominantly it has been operating in a very different environment. We, in the past, we never used to actually collect consumer information, but now we do. And then since Heineken is a European organization based in Amsterdam as a headquarter, we need to also follow GDPR regulations, which is also something that is aligned with AI. And the usage of data and how do you create personalization and so on and so forth. I think the important point here when we talk about AI threats, I mean, this is a very hot topic at the moment because on one side where the promoters of AI, they are not so much about, they don't have a sort of a boundaries where they are saying that, okay, you should not do certain things. They would like to actually reap the benefit of the AI solutions. On the other side of it, like more of a risk manager, they are actually raising these questions that, okay, what is happening? Are we actually in control while we implement these solutions? Do we have, a comprehensive outlook about these solutions that we do not, go wrong in future? And to be honest, I mean, from my perspective, these questions are very legitimate and very important to ask. At this point of time, because what I feel that AI, it has already gone beyond the boundaries where now people have a better control on this, and then we have that appropriate measures already, and these models are now continuously developing. Every day we make new models and we deploy in our business processes, and the time has, getting out of our hands where we can actually take this opportunity to control everything and then make sure that we use AI in a very responsible manner. And the current function in any organization, when you see people are more keen in terms of adaptability and affordability of AI rather than implementing it with a very high standard of integrity and of course ethical responsibility. So that's something which is not happening at the moment. And then there is no reason that people would actually try to seek more of ethical standards on AI, reason being because it requires, of course, that investment. And those investments are not cheap because this particular field, it's very, very expensive at this moment. And it's not affordable in all its areas. So what is currently happening is that people are investing more on the affordability, scalability, and adaptability of AI and compromising the ethical standards, which is continuously happening. And I can tell you by experience that I have seen it happening, and there are no controls, there are no governance procedures that I see which is in place. If you talk about like companies like Netflix, for an instance, Facebook, they have been trying because they not only actually connect in the professional world, but they actually go in the normal consumer world where there are users, where are users like you and me, and users like Mike and Julie, and we try to connect on these social networks. We actually absorb a lot of information, which is basically purely driven by AI. And they want to make sure that there are appropriate measures which are being taken so that we do not inspire our mindset in a different way, in a negative way, or in a way that we would not want to. So those are the things that are currently happening, and I believe that in organizations such as FMCG, for an instance, banks, insurance companies, financial services, where I do not see, I mean, these standards are very closely monitored at the moment, not in the area of, especially when we do marketing of our products and when we try to create this customization, personalization, because it's no more a neutral world at this point. The moment you create the personalization, it means that you are gone. Your persona is created. You will only get the offers that you require. You are already seeking for. So it's no more a world where we can talk about that. Okay, it's a neutral world. Things are already biased. Things are already, I mean, having some sort of, I would say, some sort of a predisposition where we are trying to actually inculcate some behavior from the past data, which may or may not be relevant, which may be biased, and trying to portray a particular recommendation that is based on that, and which could possibly have, errors, or possibly in the flow of things when we learn these models, again and again on a continuous basis, may evolve in a particular framework where it will start making those errors. But we would not be able to know it because there is no governance procedures, there is no regulatory authority that can do it at this point of time.
Thanks, Varun. And Varun, you just answered all my 5 questions, so thanks for that. Just kidding. And Tony Lee, thanks for that article that you just highlighted in terms of the issue of machine hacking AIs. Thanks for showing an article that is out of CDOTrends, but that's fine. We are all friends. JS, machine hacking AIs. Are we there, or is this another just an experimentation by cyber criminals?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I haven't really read the article before. Yeah, so maybe I need to take some time to read about it. But in general, right, I mean, there are some what do you call it? We see some in general, right? I mean, we see some kind of attack specifically designed for AI kind of system, right? I think we heard about something like adversarial kind of attack, right? So maybe originally you can recognize something like correctly, right? But somehow you just make some tweak to, or maybe there's some kind of a what do you call it, filter, right? Then totally blow out the whole thing, right? I mean, of course, that requires a lot of carefully engineered kind of artifact to really game the system, right? So it is possible, but I mean, at the moment, it's probably not. It really need a quite sophisticated kind of a understanding of the machine learning system, right? So I probably at the moment I wouldn't say it's kind of quite a mainstream, but certainly it is possible, right? Certainly it is possible. Yeah. But related to the context in the article, I haven't really read in details, yeah. But I guess it's probably around the same line, right? They're trying to game the AI systems to some extent, yeah. Okay.
Thanks. Michael, you mentioned just now in terms of looking at the data, it's really a data issue. A lot of AI models are trained on historical data. A lot of that historical data is actually sitting in backup tapes and so on and so forth. And we all know, since we are all very honest here, they are not in the best way stored in any organization. So how do you actually address this challenge and making sure that the data sets are fine when you actually train your AI models? What are the best practices from your concept?
Yeah, look, I think there's it's sort of a little bit of an open-ended conversation, but I think it's very dangerous to try and use historical data, especially if you look at data that's stored in siloed locked up data environments, and try to use that and force feed that into an environment where AI then starts feeding off that. And I think we all agree, and again, being completely open about it, but I think we all agree that historical data, it doesn't matter what company vertical you are in, is not well set up. It's definitely not set up for a world where you've got these machines and algorithms to feed off it. So, is there a better way to do it? I don't have the answer for it, but I think especially when it comes to things like financial services, where you've got to be very careful on what type of data you use. I think the idea of internal company sandbox or an environment where you test this and you set it up into in a completely separate, secure environment using real-time data that you get from whatever digital distribution channels that you have set up. I think that's a much better way to do it. It's a much cleaner way than trying to force feed something onto an incompatible environment. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to sort of clean that historical data firstly, and get the data infrastructure correct. And I think there's companies needs to realize that, yeah, I mean, AI sounds great and sounds sexy and stuff, but I think what needs to be done first is get off of that ride of throwing out the buzzwords and stuff like that, and actually maybe start investing into data infrastructure and architecture, and getting the right teams and resources in place to really map out your data roadmap, you know, over the next 12 to 24 months. Understand very clearly what you want to do with your data, what you can do from a regulatory standpoint and a security standpoint. And once you do that, then you start to back up the new technologies like AI, and again, understand clearly what you want to achieve with AI. I mean, AI should be used in a million ways currently. So again, I think that a roadmap is crucial, as opposed to what we unfortunately do see out here, which is, you know, people just sort of jumping onto the bandwagon and wanting to, you know, whether it's for PR's sake, whatever else, you know, talk about, you know, we're using AI for this and that. It's definitely not the right way to go. So I think the you know, to answer your question sort of, you know, in a more clear way is number one, understand what you want to achieve, understand how your data infrastructure should look like to be compatible with what's going to happen in the future. Would be that is dynamic enough to be able to consume whatever technologies would come from things like AI and stuff like that as it matures. Understand then, as you got your roadmap, understand how you want to use AI in different ways and forms, and then maybe create a separate sort of a sandbox environment where you can start to test your theory by setting it up using front-end data, data coming from front-end digital channels, feeds, and distribution channels, and then really then start to understand what's happening. And I think crucially, as you do that, the communication internally in a company to educate, I think, company broadly on what is happening, what you see, what you're achieving, and so forth is also a crucial part of it.
Thanks, Michael. Jianshu, you want to add on to that?
Sure. Yeah, if I may, right. So certainly, I mean, fully agree what Michael was describing, right. So I think I recall there was probably about 2 or 3 years ago, right. There's a very famous kind of a blog post, right. I mean, we talk about the 7 layers of the so-called hierarchy, right. So I mean, in psychology, you have the layer of the human needs, right. So I mean, AI similarly, you have the same kind of a setup, right. So the bottom layer is always about you need to get your data right. You need to collect your data right, and then slowly you need to really like data governance and data exploration, data transformation, all your ETL things and all your kind of a basic like data monitoring things. You certainly need to get it right before you can really move on to the top of AI, right? I mean, deep learning or not, right? That one certainly need to get right. I think this is a very interesting kind of a thing we just want to honor. And another thing which probably I want to add on, right? I mean, AI at the end of the day, certainly you really want to get it working, right? 2 things we need to get it right. One is about data, right? Understanding of data certainly is important. And so the second thing is also understanding of your problem statement, right? Because these 2 need to come hand in hand, then you can really get things working. You can't just treat data as it is, because at the moment, I mean, if you just treat data without any context, data is just numbers, right? It doesn't really mean too much things. But if you put into a context, we don't better, okay, whether this data I have already curated, I already collected, is it really enough? Right, then you can move on to, okay, maybe it's not enough, maybe I need to kind of collect more, right? That is probably on the data side. And another thing is certainly is also other aspect, right? Because I mean, after you build a model, now we talk about, because data is just data, as I mentioned, right? So sometimes previously, back in the old days, we don't really care too much about biasness and robustness and things like that, right? But I think now people starting to realize that as well, right? Because we are not just going for a good performing model, right, in terms of accuracy or precision, whatever you call it. But the other day is really about a few other things which we need to address is also about the fairness and the robustness of your model, right? So when we talk about fairness, basically in a way, I think we heard about a lot of these discussions recently, right? It's a fully loaded topic. Probably we also need to be very careful here when we talk about fairness, right? But it's really about, do we really in a way bias towards a certain group of people? I mean, it depends what kind of, I mean, of course, people would say there's a different kind of a notion of fairness, right? I mean, maybe there's about some people will say they're more than 20, some people even say they're more than 30, right? But doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, I think what we're really trying to measure on top of the performance is also, are we in a way that the model is really the bias towards a certain group, right? That's probably one thing to look at that. And on robustness is probably allude to what I mean, related to what I mentioned earlier on, really in a way adversarial kind of attack, right? Because maybe your model is not fully trained yet, right? So in a way, like, because let's say you're using a very sophisticated deep learning models, right? So maybe like certain neuron is not really like fully tested, right? In terms of coverage or anything, it may not be fully trained, right? So are we able to look into that and try to see, okay, or maybe my model is not really like fully trained yet. I need to pull more data. If I want to pull more data, what kind of data I need to pull, right? So those are all the, I think, all related questions we need to answer. But again, you might notice all is really around data and business problem statement, right? Yeah.
Thank you. And Julianne, you mentioned just now in your opening statement about governance and having humans to actually look at, validate whether the model is working properly. So how do you actually train the humans to actually do this validation? Because in the first place, we want the AIs to more or less be much more less biased than the humans in the first place. How do you actually work with those team and create that kind of best practices within your company?
Yeah, actually, when say some human intervention, it's actually a combination of having some program there that actually checks the performance of the model, then keep on checking if it still passes the performance and robustness of the model. Yeah, and not just having that adjustment of the parameters of the AI models, especially if they are implemented in a large scale, and for also in terms of processes that have high impact to the company, let's say for underwriting, for different stuff. So that's some sort of human intervention there. And also having that, also when implementing models, it's also important to set up a sort of feedback process. So in the sense that the users or the business that are more close to the implementation of the model also have that dialogue with them, so that just knowing it and then validating it through the modeling design.
Okay, great. I'd like to go ahead.
Sorry, if I may add, sorry about that, Winston, right? So I mean on the model governance, I think certainly there's an important topic, right? I would say probably let's say the one I mentioned earlier on, right? The robustness and fairness. I think this is probably something that before you really deploy the model, you probably need to run this test before you deploy the model into production. It's a bit like in the old days when you roll out a new release of a software, you need to test, do the pen test and do whatever test you can do, right? But I think we probably need to adopt the same thing in machine learning as well, right? So before you really roll out a model, do we have the proper kind of a procedure to really test the model, right? But again, as I mentioned earlier on, the difficulty of AI is not as our usual kind of a security, right? So no matter how hard you try, you might still be able to realize, okay, maybe your model has some kind of a flaw in there or kind of defects in there. So I think, so in a way, a bit like a risk management perspective is also important, right? Or maybe the governance, I mean, depends on how you look at that. But it's, let's say one thing we probably need to look into it is like, do we know the version which currently in the production environment, what data has been used to build a model, right? If let's say somehow the model performance drops, and because you might have a different version of your model, right? So you need to know which version has been deployed and what data has been used to develop a model. And if let's say the model performance drops, how can we really quickly roll back to a different version? Because you can't afford probably just take out the whole system altogether. You might still want to run your system, right? Do we have a fallback plan? Or either fall back to a more non-AI kind of system, maybe rule-based system, or are we talking about a different version of a previous model, right? I think those are the things is also part of the governance framework or maybe risk management framework as well, right? Is that in terms of a monitoring, if your model goes wrong, what can we do, right? So that's probably, I mean, another thing I probably just want to add on as well. So let's. Yeah, I mean, governance is not just about the process. Process, I think, is important. But technically speaking, do we have a mechanism to really let's say, take down your model and then put a different version on into your production environment. That's probably also something we need to look into as well. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'll go to Varun, but just before that, we have a poll question. Since the audience is participating with such enthusiasm, we need to get them flowing, the questions flowing. So we have a poll question. The question here is, do you think CISOs and heads of security should get involved from the start with AI projects? We'd like to hear from you or what you think. We will also discuss about that. But I'd like to go to Varun at this moment. And Varun, we have heard about sandboxes. We are looking at data governance structure. When you, in your company, when you go into AI projects, do you jump right into POCs, or do you take a step back and look at the kind of data sets you have and make sure that you have the right data governance controls? Because you have a bigger risk in terms of GDPR as well, as you mentioned.
Yeah, that's right. It's a good question. So a few things here. First is, again, I mean, as I said, like as Heineken, we have not reached to a stage where we have very, large scale of data for our consumers. It's more of a customer's data that we call it outlets. I mean, those are like institution data that I talk about, right? So we have that. I mean, when we try to talk about a particular use case that we want to deploy, what we do, I think both the things what you just said. One is that we look at, of course, our data streams and data standards, and then, of course, ethical usage of data as well. I mean, in order to whatever the appropriate measurements that we can actually put on top of that. And then after that, we jump on POC. So that's the sequential cycle. But what happens actually, so to be honest, I mean, this governance that we are talking about, and I think I'm building up from previous question as well, the governance framework that we are talking about is, nobody is sure at the moment that what this governance structure should be and where should it be, should it be placed within the organization hierarchy. Second thing, what should be the KPIs of these governance structure? When we are talking about that your model should be robust, fair, unbiased, what are we talking about? So we know that in the industry that there are measurements that are being taken in order to understand how better my model is. So we see sales uplift, we see a lot of model uplift, model efficacy, we look at ROC, AUC curve, and all of those technical elements which are basically enabling you to understand that how robust your models are. But what you don't know, in order to understand the biasness, fairness of your model, what are the metrics that you need to look at? And what are those test controls that we need to also put in place? So one of such examples that happened with Amazon, actually, I guess probably a year back or 2 years back. So they adopted a new recruitment system which was purely AI driven, and it was actually shortlisting few candidates. And then over the period of time when they were, so it was still in the early stage, actually probably about 2 or 3 months after deploying that system, they realized that it is actually not selecting any of the female candidates, because the underlying data set that was used to train this AI candidate selection process was something which was biased, and therefore it was not happening, and then they scrapped that entire framework. So again, in order to put this into a larger scale of things, we need to think and ponder that what are those different elements that we need to look at when we talk about AI fairness, AI robustness. From my perspective, what I have seen so far, and even like building up from a previous organization, PwC, which is basically very strong in this particular subject area. So they came up with a sort of a framework where there are like 2 different areas where they looked at. One is more of a performance of your model, and second is more of a security of your model. So security is in general sense, I mean, cyber threats, there are possibly using your platform, there is an intrusion that happens, and they do something as like Cambridge Analytica, right? What they did in United States using the Facebook data and so on. But only on the performance, which is in control of the organizations that are developing those models. From there are like number of points, which is about explainability, which is about biasness, which is about robustness of your model, which is about continuous feedback. All of these things actually need to be considered and then to be deeply thought in order to understand that what metrics do I need to look at when I talk about responsible AI or responsible usage of AI. That's something which we need to do. In Heineken, we do this partially. I wouldn't say that we do it exhaustively, because we are also early in our stage. And we have right people now who would be looking at all these aspects of application of AI that we would like to use for our consumer consumer-related solutions. So that will be something which will be looked at. But I would say that we are still in the middle of this journey. We do not know where do we want to go. We are continuously learning from industry, continuously learning from regulators, and implementing those procedures and methods. So GDPR is like one of those frameworks that we of course use quite extensively. Reason being because that is a place for us to of course follow, because these are and that's where I feel that the regulators and government should and will play a very important role, because there is no incentive for companies in order to run these different AI solutions, because if they are continuously running, they are actually reaping the benefit of these AI solutions. They are not looking at from the ethical standards. They are thinking that, okay, if it helps my business to grow from certain X percentage to Y percentage in terms of my business, that is it. That is what the success metrics for my AI solution. But does it mean that if it is actually discriminating, let's say, a few profiles, customer segment, also bringing illegitimate activities in your network, that is something which people are not really bothered at this moment.
Thanks. And Jess, just a quick one before I bring up the poll results. Are we being too critical about AI bias? Because we did not have been that critical when it came to humans.
Yeah, that's quite a sensitive question, right? It's a fully loaded question.
It's my job, Jianshu.
Yeah, so we probably also tied to the task or the business problem we're trying to address, right? Let's say for a certain task, maybe I think even for a human just assuming AI just another artificial human, right? Let's say when human is making the decision, sometimes for an easy decision, we don't really question too much about whether you're biased or not, right? But when things come to a more sensitive issues, then we would tend to be paying more attention to the decision, whether the decision is really biased or fair, right? So I think probably we need to look into a context, right? But of course, as I mentioned right now, there's a lot of some other reasons, right? I think recently there's a lot of a discussion around fairness, right? Certainly we need to pay attention to, right? But whether it's too critical or not, I think, as I mentioned, maybe we really need to look into the context which we try to use AI to address, right? So I think that's probably, I would say, probably case by case. But certainly one thing I think for sure we need to pay attention. We need to be aware of so-called algorithmic biasness, right? That's one probably we need to pay attention to. And another thing maybe on top of that is that when we feel, okay, this is the problem statement which we're trying to tackle, it is really an important thing, and we want to address the biasness, then I think the next question maybe we need to answer is, because as I mentioned earlier on, there might be a lot of different fairness definitions of metrics, right? As I mentioned earlier on, maybe some people will say there's more than 20, right? And maybe another one can give you another 30, right? So among all this, do all this matter to the problem statement? Maybe not, right? Maybe just a few of them will be matters, right? Then I think we just need to be careful by picking the measure, right? That's one. And second thing is, recently I just read a news, probably came out yesterday, right? I think you probably all the panelists here probably also read it as well. There was a kind of a news about Zoom and Twitter, right? There's some kind of a biasness there as well, right? When we are using the virtual background, like what I'm doing now, for some skin color, it might be just height, right? You can't really see your head, right? There's a bit of discussion around that. And Twitter also have the same question, because I think when the guy was trying to describe the issues, right, we post an image, right? And the image, when you show the preview, you only show the white color colleagues. It didn't show the darker skin color, right? Again, certainly it is a kind of a bit of bias, right? But I think, but what I'm trying to say is, there's a very interesting comments in the article, right? Twitter, a spokesperson from Twitter was saying, we did kind of a test before we roll out a model, and we didn't really find evidence of bias towards gender or race, right, in our testing. But what happened now, it basically shows that, okay, probably there's more to be tested, right? So I think maybe I'll just want to highlight one thing. As I mentioned earlier on, right, it is probably difficult to defend altogether. But at the end of the day, again, right, I mean, if let's say we find something, are we able to quickly do something to address it, right? So that's probably something we can also keep in mind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Varun.
Yeah, I wanted to actually make 2 points on that question. One is it's not about being too critical about AI. It's about actually having the right ethical standards from the scratch, from the start, from the beginning of this particular thing, that we do not know how will this shape up in future, number one. So we are losing that window of opportunity that I definitely feel. And therefore, I mean, we need to be very sensitive about, making sure that how do we use this particular technology and this entire, solutions that we will actually make on this AI stack. Second thing, I think, which is Jay has already mentioned here, this is one of the practical examples. And believe me, if you think the data that we have captured over the last 1 or 2 decades, that data has been captured with certain level of human bias already. And now we are going to use that data to build a model for us that will drive our future recommendations. And that data has already got its biasness, which AI systems will not be able to recognize, because those systems actually work with these data that you actually feed in, and then they will provide recommendations. That's the entire job. You give input and then they give output, and those outputs are driven from the different patterns that it finds out from the data. But if your underlying data is completely biased with that human unconscious cognitive biasness, which was there in some soft and thin line, which we have not seen, and you will build models on that, what will happen? I mean, imagine a situation, because this is one question which in financial services everyone is asking. The people who are unbanked, the people who are not given access in the credit space at this point of time, will they be able to actually get the credit when there's AI recommendation engines start giving those those recommendations, and will basically verify your profile that whether you are credit worthy or not? And your underlying data is something where you have already discarded them. So eventually what will happen, you are magnifying or the same biasness, that unconscious human biasness, into multifold with these AI models, and you don't have any visibility to it, and you won't be able to realize it until the point in time. And when you move, the moment when you realize it and you want to turn back, it will be difficult for sure. So these are the 2 important points that I feel that which are there, in terms of being little sensitive about AI and its usage.
That's fine. It's good to be sensitive at this point. We have some questions from the audience, and I'd like to bring that first. Yannick how has the pandemic has affected our expectation of machine learning and AI for 2021? And will we see some harder look at ROI of projects? Maybe Julianne can sort of answer that one. Do you want to take that?
I'll try to answer the first one. So how has the pandemic has affected our expectation of machine learning and AI? So it actually has caused some questions into the validity of models, because there's a lot of change in behaviors in the customers. Yeah, but in that doing so, it affected in the sense that right now we're doing a lot of robustness testing, a lot of validation, and a lot of readiness in terms of when we do apply models in the next year. Yeah, so that one.
Okay. And Varun, could you take the second one? Based on what your thoughts about governance and making sure biasness, are people in your company taking a harder look at the projects, AI projects, and looking at the ROI of it?
Yeah. So this has been always a contentious choice, actually. Whenever you want to invest, of course, you have very ambitious outlook towards the AI solutions. When we talk about the investments, it's generally quite expensive. Yeah, it's not something which is cheap, because talent is expensive, the underlying technologies are expensive, and it is very important that we actually get ROI in the very early stage, at least when we are running proof of concepts or proof of value. And then this is something which has been looked really hard even after COVID. because now since the budgets are cut for various types of investments, I mean, your ability to drive innovation through AI is also something which is under question now. And then people are asking that, can you actually find out a place or areas where you can, scale, more efficient AI solutions that are cheap and can provide some business benefits. So that is definitely there. And what happened, I mean, during the COVID times, I mean, all the AI innovation that we wanted to do is something that we had to really scrap. Reason being because the data, which was now, which we see from April until now, this is something which has a very spurious and sparse characteristics. So nothing can be made on this because all the previous behavior that we have realized over the period of time, we do no longer see it in this particular stage in these months of our calendar. Forward also, I mean, this particular instance where when we start using this data will no longer be useful in future as well. So it's a very critical situation, and we need to see that what can be scaled up with the still current underlying information that we have, because we do not want to lose, of course, our pace in terms of building this AI innovation. But at the same time, we need to be mindful of how much cost and what data are we using in order to build those AI solutions.
Thank you. And quickly, I wanted to go to Tony Lee's questions in terms of AI being biased, and now it's already deeply embedded. He gave an idea of what the Netflix documentary, I guess is the social media documentary, talked about. But just to widen the scope, JS, the question I wanted to ask is private-public partnerships, where do they come in to make sure there's a framework when it comes to biasness or fairness, as you call it, because you're in the mix of it?
Right. Yes, indeed. I mean, Singapore in a way is a bit of a bridge between public and private, right? I mean, when it comes to the question, I mean, fairness and robustness, or maybe in general, I mean, in bigger context, the governance, right? As I mentioned, probably a few things will probably at play, right? One is certainly really about the criticalness of the task, right? For more critical tasks or more sensitive tasks, certainly we need to have certain kind of whether you call it regulation or whether you call it like a bit like a commonly accepted kind of a task or kind of a test or maybe audit of the model, right? I think that one probably it should be required, right? And certainly this one probably you need some kind of a public sector to come in, right? So a bit like maybe autonomous vehicle tasking, right? Certainly because human life is kind of at risk. Right? Certainly you need to be more cautious about that, right? Or maybe like financial, let's say, whether you're gonna grant the loan, or maybe do you want to give in sense of underwriting decision, right? So I think all those that somehow is more critical to human life. I mean, certainly certain kind of what do you call it, the benchmark might be required, right? Because you might build your data, let's say like company A, maybe you build a model by using your own so-called historical data, right? Maybe another company maybe using their own kind of data, right? But maybe you can say, okay, my model performed very good, and I also do some tests, and then my model performed very fair and very robust, right? But because the data you build is probably different from other people's data, right? So I think at the end of the day, it might make sense to have a kind of a industry specific or even more task specific benchmark or audit might be required. And if you really want that to happen, I think certainly the public sector need to come in, right? And to a certain extent, Air Singapore is also trying to, I mean, at least in Singapore context, we're trying to do something along the line. I mean, of course, not doing it on our own. I mean, we're trying to work with different partners, right? For specific tasks, at least we're trying to do that, right? So in a way, to certify the model, to put it that way. I mean, that's the goal probably we're alluding to, right? Yeah, but I mean, certainly that might be the direction to go, yeah, for more critical tasks,
Thank you, JS. I'd like to bring up the poll results. Could we have the poll results out? Okay, so the question was, CISOs and heads of security should get involved, should they get involved in the start of AI projects? There's an overwhelming 67% says, yes, AI demands a team approach. The second majority is not really sure. And very few, it says that CISOs are seen as an innovation killer. It's interesting. Mike, just your thoughts on about the poll results as you see it?
No, I think it's correct. It is a team effort. You know, I think you know, the general idea is, or the perception out there is that CISOs is an innovation killer. They're only an innovation killer if they don't understand what you want to use new technology for, and if they're not part, if there's not clarity. And I think just if I look at my sort of, you know, 5 years so far in coming out from the startup world into the corporate space and stuff, and having to deal with that. You absolutely need the C-suite and the leaders and the you know, the IT leaders and all these guys in the organizations. You need their collaboration. You need the collaboration from you know from the outside, whether it's governments and so forth. There needs to be governance around these things that you want to do and roll out. And there has to be a very clear understanding what you want to achieve with that and what you're going to do with that. You know, innovation for the sake of innovation is the worst thing that you can actually do. It's just an absolute money waste. You know, so you know, if you can do that, and if you can very clearly articulate why you want to do it and what you're trying to achieve, and then make sure that the teams and the leaders is involved. I think it's literally the only way that you can actually move forward. And once you've got that senior leaders buy-in, they would become an ambassador and a driver for you as well, as opposed to stifling it. Usually, the stifling effect comes from either not understanding, not knowing where things fit in, and no clarity on it. Of course, there is still some leaders that sort of categorically blocks innovation, purely possibly because of a misunderstanding, or just being being very traditional in thinking and so forth. You know, I'm not going to go into that, because that's literally a switch that the person has to physically make, and if they're not going to make it, you do have issues within the organization. But I think the brunt of leaders currently these days is in the position where they understand that this needs to happen, understand that there needs to be innovation and investment into this place. And I think it's the role of the tech team or the innovation teams then to help them clear up and create this sort of like that clarity around what you want to achieve with it.
Thank you, Michael. So we are nearing the end, but I'd like to end by actually giving a chance to all our panelists. There's a topic that we have not really broached yet, which is using AI for security. So I'm just wanting to have 1 or 2 points from yourself on how you look at this topic. Maybe JS, you can start.
So the question is about by using AI to,
AI for security,
Yeah, so I think AI for security has been, based on my kind of a memory, I'm just trying to recall. I mean, AI for security has been there, especially for network security, right, has been there for many years, right? Because I mean, even when I was a PhD student a few years back, there's a lot of activities, and now we see that the technology more mature, right? I mean, a lot of people try to use machine learning to detect anomalies, basically detect the network attacks, right? And the idea, in a way, the general principle is probably quite straightforward, right? I mean, you have the pattern of the normal packet, right? And then for whatever things which is different from the normal ones, you probably flag it as a kind of anomaly. That's one approach to do it, right? So AI for security, for network security, certainly is possible, right? And then maybe we talk about security in a wider sense. Let's say security of, because security on the other side of security is probably risk, right? If you talk about risk, then it's of course getting more wider context. You can risk in financial or risk in insurance. We talk about underwriting and things like that, right? So I mean, no one certainly it is at the end of the day. I mean, from technical perspective, it is certainly an AI problem, and it is possible. Certainly, it's doable. I mean, a lot of I mean, my colleague here, and then maybe some in the audience, I think they have been probably tried already, right? And that one certainly is possible, because I mean, again, you just need to look from the historical data. I mean, what it is so-called less risky one, what is the risky one, and try to flag it out. I mean, in technical terms, we call it a classification, right? So that one certainly is possible. But again, you need to look into it from maybe a more holistic kind of approach. I mean, after you build a model, whether your model is, I think we go through the discussion just now, whether the model is fair, whether the model is robust, right? Yeah, but certainly a quick answer to that is certainly yes, it is possible, and it is very possible because there's a lot of off-the-shelf commercial solution available there as well.
Okay, Varun, Julianne, Mike, just one point on your thoughts about AI for security?
Yeah, I mean, that's like something which is very, very prevalent now, and it has been becoming even more stronger than in the past. And the reason behind it, because nobody asks like questions like whether your model is accurate, biased, or explainable, or anything like that in fraudulent. I mean, in AI for security purposes. The reason being because you are very result oriented, and you want to see the results whether your models are more effective than your normal business processes and then human judgment and so on. So nobody's talking about any biasness and unexplainability part in such areas. You will see a lot of different areas where currently AI being used for the security purposes. I mean, one of those is possibly the network detection. I think you also mentioned in one of your documents about anti-money laundering. There is about content on fake news. There is also content is about fake user profile on the social networking, where it is very prominently used. Then there are activities which are like more around transactions. So I mean, in my previous company, Visa, we used to make models on identifying the fraudulent transactions, the transactions that are not done by the legitimate cardholders. So that's another one. Then I think in Facebook there is one more which is on the fake merchant side, because now since this entire e-commerce area space is becoming bigger and bigger, there are a lot of merchants that are coming in, and then they try to sell a lot of different products and services, and some of them are fake, and they collect money and then they go away. So I mean, these companies such as Facebook, Instagram, they need to have a very strong foundation in order to find out these. Then there is one more which is more about the objectionable content. That is something which is also very, very relevant, especially, I mean, in context of, let's say, when we talk about Facebook, we talk about Instagram, we talk about Netflix. Now, what is happening, the users that are used to actually log in on these platforms, the age of these users are continuously decreasing because we are, adapting more and more devices. Even, our kids are also having these devices at certain age where they may not be sure about the content that they see, and then what do they need to click and so on. And all of those things are happening currently in that space as well. So AI for security purposes is very, very important. I guess it's an important consideration, definitely. And, it will become stronger and stronger in days to come.
Thank you, Varun. And Mike and Julian, if you have you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I'll just say, I mean, yeah, of course, there's a whole bunch of stuff happening in AI, for security and for good reason. You've got things like block stitching and all these other things that Varun has mentioned. So it's a massive market, and if you've got some money, I'll definitely, I'll advise to put some money behind some of these companies who's doing that, especially protecting personal data and stuff like that. AI models that helps you protect your own personal data layer, definitely.
Julianne?
Yeah, so maybe just to add, I agree that it's really important, especially now that the application of the AI models is expanding in terms of their applications in the banking industry where I'm at, and of course in the other industries as well. So it's really important to have that security in place.
Thank you. So I'd like to say thank you to all the panelists. I think we had a wonderful session. We took quite a difficult topic. We saw the problem statements and we created new problem statements, and we actually analyzed it. So thank you all. Thank you. To see you again for all the Digi-Live. For all those who are still online, just don't close out yet. You still have to hear my voice for 1 to 2 minutes. So personally, thank you. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the session. This is going to be our first of our Digi-Live. And thanks to all our international cast of panelists. Thank you for Nicole Lowe for entertaining us. And since this is our first event, we really want to know how we did it. So there will be a 5-question survey, a very short one that will be sent to you by email. You don't have to do anything about it now. Just look out for that email and tell us how it is. So other than that, on behalf of our sponsor, Barracuda Networks, and we at CDOTrends, we would like to thank you, and please stay safe. Ciao.